So, Tom, you've been working with Coacho for a few years now. How did that first happen? Where did that come from?
So it was back when I was working at BT. BT had a real ambition to go from a on-premise identity services capability to a cloud-native capability. And this was in the context of customer identity authentication. I was talking to one of our enterprise architects, and we were sat and having a discussion, and we looked at how many applications we wanted to migrate, how many people we needed to get onto modern authentication, and looking also at who the supplier was going to be, who our partner was going to be for this ambition. And kind of we need a tech accelerator partner. We need a partner who understands the environment, the complexities of moving from a on-prem to cloud-native solution. And I was aware that my architect friend had worked with a company on, I think, some B2B integrations. At the time, was like, oh, it's ThirdSpace. So obviously I know you guys primarily as ThirdSpace, not Coacho. And that's kind of how it started, really. So kind of my background, I've worked in IT now for, 17 years, I think. I literally came fresh out of school, went straight into an IT world, did an apprenticeship with BT, and kind of spent 15, 16 years there. IT service operations, then moving into cybersecurity, which I ran BT's customer-facing team, and then kind of moving to kind of more identity and transformation. My boss had given me a call and said, hey, BT and E want to go on this vision, which is to do identity services to the cloud. You really know identity as it is today. Can you please go and join this project, this program, and help the team along? Which is when I came more into a consultancy focused role within identity. And that's when obviously I started working with you guys. And we went on that program on that journey for probably at least 3 years or so. Yep. Massive eye-opener, hugely technologically complex. It was a period in time where I think the program actually started during COVID or maybe a year before. Just before. And it was a very, very exciting journey, very challenging journey as well.
All turned out well. All went live. Worth noting that ThirdSpace, which Tom was working with, became Coacho. There was a merger that happened a number of years ago now. I tend to forget exactly when it was. I know the rebranding happened on April the 11th, week after my birthday. They put it back by a week because marketing weren't quite ready with some of the images. But it's the same organisation. We have the same people. I've been involved with BT for 20 odd years now, but we'll ignore that and just step over. So you left BT and took over this new role with another of our well-known organisations.
Yeah.
What led you there?
So I was kind of at a place in my career where I wasn't sure where I wanted to kind of go into next. I didn't see kind of a logical transition within BT. So I had the opportunity to basically leave under a leavers program. I kind of spent 6 to 9 months kind of just upskilling qualifications, taking a bit of downtime and reflecting, and kind of was a view that I wanted to stay within authentication, but I wanted a lot more control over my job role and also kind of my influence on how I could deliver modern authentication services to an organization. I was not looking to go to another large organization. I definitely was not looking towards going to a large organization that had similar technical challenges. However, I saw this role, I saw the job spec, and I thought I could make a real difference, real influence there, taking the learning that I'd had from BT, but also knowing within a product owner role and owning authentication as a service at British Airways, I would kind of have that realm control of not just being kind of a consultant and a agitator and influence of good security and modern authorization authentication services, but also knowing that it was going to be my project roadmap, my vision, and kind of helping BA get to where it wants to be, which is to totally transform and modernize digital services within the organization. And yes, I joined. Did not know that Coacho had been selected at British Airways either as the partner. That was not known. I actually got pinged by a colleague who I used to work with on the BT project about a month before I joined, who said, I know where you're going next. And I said, that's not possible. I literally spoke to my mum and dad about a week before, and they're the only people who know where I'm going next. He said, well, I've just sat in a room and your name's come up. And that's how I knew then that BA were also partnering with Cocho on their transformation for modern authentication services.
So it's quite interesting. A lot of the challenges, although the technologies are different, between the BT migration and the BA migrations, because there's lots of them going on, actually using the same team. So
yes,
it's quite a familiar team to you and the way that we're working.
It is, yeah.
Which is also good. So what do you consider to be the key considerations around doing identity within that type of corporate environment? Not necessarily at the scale of BA and BT, but what do you consider the things that these people should be taking account of?
I think that if you're not already, you have to be considering identity, obviously, as your core perimeter. So within our identity, and this is not just in a workforce environment, it's also in a customer environment as well. So e-commerce services that you use, you have an identity for. That is your digital identity to transact. That is the gateway to you as a consumer of a capability and a service, but also it is a threat actor's gateway. So when we talk about identity in either context, right, not just as a privileged role as an admin role, but also just as a general user role in terms of how you access a device or a service to perform your job function, you have to have operate least privilege. Okay, so least amount of privilege to perform your role. You have to have multi-factor authentication. For me now, multi-factor authentication is a standard. It is not a should do, it is a standard thing in practice. When you're looking at things like least privilege, think about privileged access management. So yes, you may need some privilege to perform the role. Do you need those privileges all the time, every day working to do that role? When you're looking at then deploying things like privileged access management, think about the types of privileges these people would require to do their job function, but also within the time they need to do that. There's no point having a workflow that says, hey, I need to have an admin role to perform this specific function if it requires line manager approval. However, if you need to perform that function 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, apply context-based controls to that workflow. Okay, said person is on this device, they're in an office location, they're requesting this level of privilege. It's within the parameters of the time frame we usually give this privilege. It's within the working hours. And you can do a modernized workflow now where you just say, okay, that privilege is going to be issued. It's not just a case of let's add layers and layers of complexity of security. It's about applying the right controls under the right context. And I think continuous monitoring and session monitoring of identity is key and critical. And foundationally, I would start with a place of, we're going to go on this transformation. How are we going to monitor it? Who is going to monitor it? And ensuring that monitoring is baked in at the ground level. I think assurance services, so people who go and do assurance of what you're building, that needs to be foundationally embedded as well. So you have this continuous cycle, especially now in terms of moving from a typical kind of waterfall style delivery model to a agile based model. You don't have the luxury of kind of design, assure, build, assure, test, assure, deliver, assure. It is a continual cycle of iterative capability. And I think for a lot of organizations, and especially large organizations, and from my experience, is that getting that cultural approach to assurance as you build and develop capability is not an easy thing to do. And I think a lot of people do see it as barriers to entry. So it's about having the right conversations with the right people and winning hearts and minds over that type of approach when it comes to building a new modern auth service and capability platform.
That was a heck of an answer. Wasn't expecting that much. One of the things that you said in the middle of that was around identifying the privileges that people need in order to do their day job. And I'm thinking in terms of things like user admin or group admin. A lot of the time we talk about PIM and say you should only require a privilege when you're actually going to do it. But to me, if your job is managing groups, then your admin role probably shouldn't involve PIM, because you need to do it all the day, every day. But I think there's a level of privilege where you actually have to say, no, you now need to use PIM. So group management for normal groups rather than privileged groups, I think we'll let somebody have that. User admin, I'm a little more worried about, particularly when it comes to passwords, and refer back to my earlier statements about passwords. But where would you see that line? Is it around as long as you're not affecting a user or an application, or where would you put it?
I don't think there's a one straight answer, first and foremost. There is elements of, obviously, in terms of organizational size and how many people we are talking about within that scope of assessment. I think there's elements of also the data that sits behind those services and how it is categorized. We're talking like high category data that sits behind those systems. Ultimately, from a regulatory point of view, there are certain controls that has to be met to meet that regulation for that sort of data category and type. There's also obviously risk appetite and business risk appetite, and also looking at, I think, who those people are if you're going to give levels of standing access to them.
Yep.
Is it your cybersecurity team? Is it a service desk team? Who are the people, and what also are the controls that sit within that group of people or that team? And again, it's things like continuous access reviews. Joe Bloggs has had this access for 2 years, but Joe Bloggs doesn't have this title that looks like remotely what the access he needs anymore. Yep. So again, and with kind of modern services and how we bring in new capability, you need to think about lifecycle management, joiners, movers, leavers, JML processes, and ensuring that you are really, really robust about how they look, what they are, and how they are governed as well. Because I can tell you now, as a historic line manager who had 18 people, doing access reviews is laborious, especially when you have somebody who's got a list of 25 things. And again, we talked about it earlier, right? Time management. So there are elements there as well. Is like, I have 18 people with access to reviews and they've each got 20 different things. I would also place close attention to birthright access as well. So what does an employee get from the get-go in terms of access as well?
I think that's actually one of there are a number of systems that I work on with you on a day-to-day basis. And I have to say, the access reviews are probably one of the nicest things. They're a pain to do. Honestly, they are an absolute pig to go through, but it works. I have lost my access to things because I don't use it. What's the point in giving me an admin access to enter a UAT if I never sign into it, if I don't actually do anything? Because the rest of the team are actually handling it. And I think that is one thing that is right within that framework. We're working on the rest between us and getting there. So one of the things that we've got with both BT and BA is an on-premises identity.
Mm-hmm.
What would you see as being the barriers to moving that to a cloud-first identity?
So firstly, you've got to obviously consider and look at your on-prem technical debt. Obviously, a lot of legacy IT estate are not compatible with things like modern auth protocols, OIDC. I was going to say the word SAML, but SAML's been around a long time, and I'm not sure I kind of want to consider that to be modern auth anymore. However, I do not see it leaving anytime soon. One of our biggest challenges has been looking at some of these applications that we've migrated, both in my previous role and current role, is the fact that they do not and are not compatible with modern authentication. You also have got challenges around going to, say, a cloud native environment from an on-premise, and it's almost, okay, so we can move the applications. How do we get the users using a cloud native first capability? And user migration. User migration is horrendously complex. Not just from hey, go and sign in using this experience that you're used to, going on to this new experience. It's also getting credentials or provisioning credentials to all of those users and getting them to signing in a different way. And that's even before you've even got into the realms of please enroll for multi-factor authentication. Please enroll for self-serve password reset. This is now how you reset your password. We're not allowing pawned passwords anymore. But wait a second, I could use this 8-character password 2 weeks ago, and now you're telling me it's not, doesn't meet the policy. So and that's just kind of, I think, some of the user-centric use cases. You also have obviously complexities around potentially skill set in the organization. Do you have people who are well versed and experienced with cloud environments and doing those type of migrations? There are also things, consideration, obviously, budgetary constraints and also value. I think that a lot of organizations, specifically this week, AWS, was it last week? Was it this week? Was it Monday?
Yes, yeah, this week.
This week's already flying. They're going, why do we move to cloud? And this whole, well, actually, it's actually when you go to a cloud environment, you have to look at your resiliency and look at how you are allocating services within your cloud environment and ensuring you have cross-site redundancy capability. And you're not just literally going, oh, we're in the cloud, but we're all just sat in one area of the cloud where we don't have resiliency. And if that entire environment fails, then we lose our entire capability. And I think at a leadership level, you need to be very clear about what your BCDR plans look like and ensuring that you're building an environment with cross-site resiliency in line with obviously data sovereignty as well, because you obviously have to consider where that data is being hosted. Again, talking about data categorization, can that data be stored in the region you want that data to be stored in? And how much control do you have of services being migrated with the data throughout that cloud environment, which sometimes is out of your control.
Completely. Do you read much science fiction?
A little.
Arthur C. Clarke.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Arthur C. Clarke postulated in the 1950s that there would be 3 or 4 data centers in the world, and that would host the computers, and everybody would use them, and everybody laughed at him. And today we have 3 organizations who hold 80% of the world's data and computing. And I think Arthur C. Clarke was probably a genius. My concern with cloud, exactly as you said, is what happens when they fail? AWS goes down and you can't log into your bank account anymore. Things happen. We went through a period in the 80s when we were moving away from mainframes and MIDI computers and putting desktops on, because that way we were adding computing power and making ourselves more able to cope with failure. One computer died, it didn't matter, you had 20 others. We're now almost going back to that stage, and we need to be aware of what we're doing with those cloud providers. To me, is AWS, they're going to learn from the mistakes they made on Monday. Are they suitable for holding everything?